Прийшли окупанти до нас в Україну, форма новенька, воєнні машини, та трохи поплавився їх інвентар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російські танкісти сховались в кущі, щоб лаптем посьорбати довбані щі, та трохи у чах перегрівся навар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Приперли зі сходу до нас барани для восстановлення
великої страни.
Найкращий пастух баранячих отар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Ті, хто води всяке озброєння різне, потужні ракети, машини залізні, у нас на всі доводи є коментар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Вони захопити хотіли нас зразу, а ми зачаїли на орків образу з російських бандитів. Робить примар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російська поліція справи заводить, там вбивцю рашистів ніяк не знаходить. Хто винен, що в нашому полі глухар? Байрактар, Байрактар. Веде пропаганду кремлівський урод, слова пропаганди ковтає народ. Тепер нове слово знає цар.
Байрактар.
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 Platforms such as UA Weapons and JomanyW on Twitter and the Enforcer channel allowed people around the world to follow the war in a depth and a way that had never happened before. Retired General David Petraeus.
Yes.
The Leaf Spring Army sends its regards.
Русский военный корабль. Предлагаю сложить оружие и сдаться. Русский военный корабль, иди нахуй.
Наші
Hello, everyone. I'm the Enforcer, and I'm accompanied by Enforcer Matt.
And good evening, folks. It's Enforcer Matt, and welcome back to day 721 of the news. And it's good to see you all once again. And today has been a hell of a news day. A lot of stuff happening today, and it's good to see you all once again.
It's been a hell of a news day, no doubt about it. And we have a lot to cover over the past 72 hours of the news of the war in Ukraine. But most importantly, we're going to be focusing entirely on the news that came out today, as many of y'all know about some of the major news topics that we're going to be talking about tonight. But I did not include one in the thumbnail or the title that we had already talked about previously, and we're going to be covering that as the first bit of truly breaking news around the world tonight. Not just about Ukraine, but about pretty much international diplomacy and international news as a whole. Many of y'all know that the Russians, according to many sources today, are planning on launching an intercontinental ballistic missile into Earth's orbit and having it sit up there until the time is needed for the Russians to call onto it and use it for a certain purpose. This is something that everyone's been talking about today. It's in fact been one of the few things that I have to say mainstream news like CNN and Fox News have actually picked up on fairly quickly and started to cover, especially considering that it's caused a massive panic within the US government, with Security Council meetings being held throughout the course of today. I'm going to be guiding y'all through our sequence of events and what we've been hearing from the very first inklings of news up until the very current moment on what has been going on in this situation, and most importantly, what this may mean if this plan is to be followed through by the Russian Federation. The first thing that we heard is that the United States apparently had been given a tip-off that there was a massive security threat being posed by the Russians, and specifically by the Russian armed forces today. This is something that we heard about on our Twitter page approximately 9 hours ago, and we immediately started posting news there. Afterwards, we heard that a statement was made by a national security advisor that the information should be made more public than it had been, not only to the nation's allies in Europe and around the world, including in the Pacific, but also to the public as well, to open up discussion on this and to try and get a better idea of what's going on out there and what the response from the United States and our alliance should be. At the moment, however, at this time in the day, absolutely nobody had any real information about what this threat posed by the Russians was. But one thing was serious is that in the intelligence world, things were being considered very serious, although most of it was being confined behind closed doors at this moment. After that, we then started to hear from some people who had been apprised of the situation but still weren't telling us much, that it was a space-based threat that posed a major risk to U.S. national security, and apparently was a lot more severe than we were being led on. And I'll be getting around here in literally just a moment to why this is incredibly serious, but I want to make sure that y'all get the sequence of events of how this transpired today to get an understanding of where we are right now, because still at this moment, while we have a lot more information than we did 9 hours ago, there still is a lot missing out of the information that we have been given. But after that, we heard that the United States then made a statement that the situation was now under control, and they were going to be able to make sure that there wasn't any massive panic that came out of the news that was coming out, but at the same time be able to release it and then try and find a way to quell the public's fears about what this is and what this may be that the Russians have done. Still at this moment...
Although it's kind of weird, though, to try to quell panic after you release such a alarming statement saying that Russia has some kind of destabilizing military capability that could wipe us all out. But don't panic, though. You're totally fine. Don't worry.
Yeah, and even then, what was even more shocking about that statement is that at the time they made that statement, they still had not given the public enough information yet to even know what this real threat is. All we knew is that it was a space-based threat from the Russian Federation, and that was it at this moment as far as public announcements went. But now I'm actually going to bring y'all to the full details and all the information we have on what this really is, or what the major national security threat being posed by the Russian Federation is at the moment. And that brings us back to Moscow. Apparently, at this very moment, inside the Russian central government, plans are being discussed to launch an intercontinental ballistic missile into Earth's orbit, most likely around the same orbital altitude as the International Space Station, around 250 miles above the Earth's surface, and have it sit there until it is called upon to act by the Russian Federation. That's what we understand at the moment. Now, of course, there's a lot involved about what this nuclear weapon could actually be used for. Some people have been saying that it could be used for a strategic strike, a one-time strike on the United States, possibly knocking out a critical system or critical infrastructure before the massive wave of attacks started to come from over the horizon across the Arctic and into North America. Of course, NORAD would have about a 15-minute heads up that those missiles are on the way, but a missile orbiting around the Earth and being deorbited and coming down on its target would have approximately a 3-minute time from its deorbiting to it hitting its target within the United States, massively decreasing the amount of time that the U.S. Department of Defense and the U.S. government would have to react. And in fact, within that frame of time of 3 short minutes, there really would be no way for the United States to react until after that strike had occurred. However, we found out that the Russians' plans, at least according to the U.S. Department of Defense, are entirely different and are not planning on actually conducting a strike within the territory of the United States at all. In fact, the missile is intended to blow up within space itself and to be used to combat the United States' satellites in orbit. Many people are probably wondering, what in the hell would a nuclear bomb do if it blew up in orbit in space? Doesn't really seem like a lot of people have talked about that before, but as a matter of fact, there have been several tests conducted back in the 1960s by the United States to figure out what a nuclear blast in Earth's orbit would do. And from what we found out, it's actually pretty freaking severe. I'm going to be taking you on to a little test that the United States conducted way back, actually in 1962, called Starfish Prime. Kind of an odd name, but this is actually a picture right here from the night when the nuclear test was conducted over the Pacific. This picture was taken from an aircraft that was flying through the area at the time, and what you're seeing is an artificial aurora borealis that was created by the explosion of this nuclear weapon up in Earth's atmosphere. Actually, it was not in Earth's atmosphere, it was way up in space, but nevertheless, to give you all an exact location of where this was, it was at Natal, right there. Sadly, it doesn't really let me show y'all on the big map, but right there in the center of the Pacific is where the explosion occurred. It occurred at an atoll, Johnston Atoll, about 1,000 miles away from Hawaii. Now, the explosion of this nuclear weapon actually caused a pretty severe after effect. It knocked out most satellites that were within Earth's orbit. It knocked out the only satellite that the British had in orbit. It knocked out both military satellites that the United States had in orbit. It also appears to have caused pretty serious damage or even knocked out the Soviet Union satellites when this test was conducted. And not only that, its electromagnetic pulse effect apparently was greatly magnified due to it exploding within the vacuum of space and caused an aurora borealis that could be seen 1,000 miles away inside of Honolulu, Hawaii. Here's the picture from that night showing what the aurora borealis looked like over the Pacific. And not only that, the electromagnetic pulse was so severe that it knocked out street lamps in Honolulu, Hawaii, as well as other facilities. And not only that, it also caused a pulse that was able to burn out the communications relays throughout most of the state of Hawaii. Giving you the idea that a nuclear explosion like this, especially over the continental United States, could have a massive impact on really the world's satellites in orbit at the moment, and not only that, possibly serve as an electromagnetic pulse device to knock out a lot of the U.S.'s strategic infrastructure and ground relays here on the surface of the Earth without even having to touch it.
Now, on that test, did they happen to say what the kiloton yield of the nuclear weapon was? Because since that time, the kiloton yield has increased like tenfold on modern nuclear weapons. So I'd be curious to know.
So the yield was 1.4 megatons. So it was actually...
Oh, damn. That was actually a big one.
Yeah, it was actually a big one. This was actually the largest high-altitude nuclear test that was ever conducted by the United States in nuclear testing history. In fact, it was the largest one ever conducted by either side during nuclear testing, especially high-altitude nuclear tests. So this is about as severe as the EMP effect could get from a nuclear bomb exploding in high Earth orbit, or low Earth orbit, if you want to call it that.
And also, just to put that in perspective, the Fat Man bomb that was dropped on Japan was 15 kilotons, which is an entirely different unit of measurement. And then the Tsar Bomba, which is the largest one ever detonated by, of all people, Soviet Union, was about 50 megatons. So this is somewhere like in the dead center of like those two different bombs, or maybe more toward the low end, actually.
Yeah, and this is actually a fairly accurate look at what a possible Russian nuclear bomb could do, or a nuclear missile could do, if it exploded at an altitude of around 250 miles above the Earth's surface, which, oddly enough, is actually the exact same kind of low Earth orbit that the International Space Station is in at this time, kind of giving you an idea of altitude. But nevertheless, the effects of a nuclear explosion like this could be crippling to not only the United States, but really most of the world, especially the developed world in the Western sphere. A lot of our military abilities would probably be knocked offline immediately, especially if they're satellite-based. Anything such as global positioning systems, usually operated through satellite, as well as military satellites that conduct imaging, or anything else for that matter, including communications, could probably be knocked entirely offline with this blast, probably within several days, if not several weeks at the longest. Not only that, but the EMP effect over the United States could also knock out ground relay systems, such as landlines, until they were replaced, which would give the Russians an ability to blind the United States before they were to conduct anything major. And the United States, while whatever would be happening around the world, would have to be trying to pick up the pieces of figuring out how to communicate to all of its parts, both inside the United States and around the rest of the world. This is something that is posing a massive security threat. Even if it isn't a direct attack on America's soil directly, the implications of this could leave the United States back in the 1950s, nearly technologically, if something like this was to occur directly over the United States. So going off that,
we were laughing yesterday about the Russians, unwinding that roll of like landline wire for their communications. We were like, what are they doing? Living in the Stone Age or something? It's like, sooner or later, the United States might need to roll out some of those landlines themselves. It's like, maybe that's what Russia's thinking. They're using that old crap because they know, we might launch something or detonate something. It could knock the satellites out.
That's what you would think. But oddly enough, Matthew, here's the even crazier part about this whole thing. Those landlines would even be knocked out by an EMP blast like that if it was overhead or even several hundred miles away. That's the crazy thing about it, because in Hawaii, it didn't burn out like the wireless relays or anything like that. It burned out the landlines.
Really?
Yeah, that's what it did way back in 1962. It burned out Honolulu's landlines in between two of the major phone companies that were operating in Hawaii.
No, I didn't know that. Are you sure? Are you sure from all the way up in space? Because I think this is, I don't know what kind of detonation this would be, because I'm not an expert on it. But wouldn't it be like a low orbit detonation? Would that have enough, way to travel to hit a landline? Because I thought landlines were kind of immune from that. They had insulation around the wiring and all that good stuff.
So here we go. Here's the information right here. And of course, this is according to Wikipedia. Y'all can go read a book if y'all need to, and also check out the sources that they have here. But according to the Wikipedia article, the EMP damage to the microwave link shut down telephone calls from Kauai to the other Hawaiian islands, completely knocking off the landline communications in between the Hawaiian islands.
Well, damn, that would be troublesome. But did it only knock them off in Hawaii or anywhere else?
It only knocked him off in Hawaii because this test was so remote in the Pacific, you can see there's literally no other country around, that Hawaii was really the only place that could be affected by this blast.
Interesting. So I guess it would be somewhat of a limited impact depending on exactly what spot the singular nuke was detonated above. Because right now it sounds like there's just one nuclear weapon being put into orbit, or it's either already there.
One or the other. And also, just to quickly allay the fears, because of course the United States government said they would like to allay the fears, and I would like to try and do that as well, or at least delay it. They say that the system is not going to be launched soon, and it's not in orbit at the moment, at least according to the official statements. We have a pretty good idea if something like this was to be launched into orbit. We would probably have a very good idea. I'm sure that the United States intelligence sphere is already heavily observing the Baikonur Cosmodrome inside of Kazakhstan, which is where the Russians conduct all of their space launches. It's their version of Cape Canaveral. But beyond that, this is something that, if the Russians were to try and pull off, would pose a serious security threat and a massive issue, not just for the United States, but for our allies. And this is something that we're going to have to be looking into seriously and trying to figure out what we're going to do. It's something that is also well within the Russians' abilities as well. Usually I would say that the Russians are completely incompetent and not capable of doing something, but throwing something up into low Earth orbit is something that the Russians have been doing for decades. They're still doing it at the moment. And even when the space shuttle program was decommissioned here in the United States and we were looking for an appropriate substitute, which came in the form of the Falcon 9 rocket provided by SpaceX, U.S. astronauts actually went up to the International Space Station aboard Russian rockets launched from Baikonur. The Russians already have the ability and have had the ability to be able to launch these low Earth orbits for a very long time, and it's not out of the realm of possibility that they could launch a pretty decent yield nuclear warhead into low Earth's orbit and allow it to stay there until they need to use it. And this is something that's very concerning. We actually have a different way of going about satellite warfare here in the United States. And allow me a moment to rabbit hole really quickly, because I actually have a great friend that sat down and took a moment to explain to me how the United States deals with satellites and what the entire purpose of one of the newest branches of the U.S. Armed Forces is. And that is actually the United States Space Force. The United States already has a branch of the armed forces completely dedicated to orbital warfare. That's the job of the Space Force. The Space Force will combat satellites either by cutting off their connections to their ground stations, either in China, Russia, Iran, or North Korea, depending on who has their satellite in space. And I do not believe the Iranians have a satellite in orbit at the moment. It's just the North Koreans, the Chinese, and the Russians. But beyond that, the plan of the SpaceX is to either completely break the connection in between the satellite and the ground station through one way or another, usually by trying to break into the satellite systems and then communicate with it directly and bring it offline. Or the Space Force actually has a separate solution, which comes in the form of something that some people may know about, but most people would have absolutely no idea it even existed. And it is this thing, the X-37B reusable spaceplane. These are
remember that thing.
Yeah, these have actually been around for an incredibly long time and have been tested for quite a while. Finally introduced into service just a few years ago, the plan behind using the X-37B is that it's a completely remote space plane that we can float up to a satellite. This little payload bay in here actually has a robotic arm, a lot like the Canadarm on board the space shuttle, but once again remotely operated. The Canadarm, or whatever kind of robotic arm they have within the payload bay, is able to interact with the satellite directly, either allowing them to make a attempt to communicate with it or completely shutting it down and destroying it. This is something that the Space Force is entirely working on. In fact, the entire function and organization of the Space Force is satellite warfare, which is largely called orbital warfare in the modern day. It's a pretty high-tech process. It's something that's very advanced. And this is the way the United States plans in the future on dealing with satellites in space. The way the Russians are going to deal with it is a much more archaic way, because when you explode a nuclear bomb in orbit, there is no way, like the Space Force can, control which satellites they're going to target and knock out. There is no way to target or knock out specific satellites with a nuclear blast. A nuclear blast in low Earth orbit like that is going to knock out not only the United States satellites, it is going to knock out the Russian satellites, the Chinese satellites. It is pretty much a doomsday kind of a weapon to blow everyone's modern communications and defense systems in space back to the Stone Age, and either leave them operating off of landlines only or operating with most of nothing at that point. So you can kind of get an idea. Once again, the United States has a pretty cutting-edge way to deal with this kind of a threat, of course, through orbital warfare. The Russians' form of orbital warfare is something that would have been come up with, back in the 1960s when Starfish Prime was actually conducted as a test. And after that was conducted, just to share with y'all, a treaty was made in between the United States and the Soviet Union forbidding the use of nuclear weapons and exploding them in low Earth orbit or having them in space at all in orbit. That has been completely banned since 1964, 2 years after Starfish Prime was conducted as a test. And if the Russians are going through with trying to actually launch this missile into orbit, they will be in violation of a treaty that, of course, was signed with the Soviet Union, but of course the Russian Federation being designated as the successor state to the Soviet Union through the United Nations, they would be violating a treaty that is still binding to them, and something that still, it poses a lot of threats and issues to the United States. Hopefully, we can only assume that the United States is going to find a way to deal with this, because, to be honest with y'all, the options are quite slim. There really is no way to deal with this thing until it gets in orbit. We can try and conduct some diplomacy with them and encourage them not to do something like that, But really, our only option is to try and either destroy the system through covert means, direct means, or something along those lines that most likely would lead to a direct conflict with the Russians. So, unfortunately, at the moment, I don't have any bright ideas as to how to come up with a solution to this matter, but nevertheless, it is incredibly serious and very concerning. And Matthew, I think...
you know what's even worse than that is I saw on Twitter earlier a source that is in the know said that the United States does not have the ability to counter this weapon and defend its satellites, says a former U.S. official. And I believe that because it seems to me like we were taken off guard by this entire situation. And I know some people are going to say, well, they've known about it. They've sort of, put it on the back burner for a while. And, I don't think that's the case. I think they just learned about it a little while ago. I know that's speculation, but the way the government is sort of going into panic mode about it indicates that it's something that just popped up, which is definitely a possibility because our government gets caught off guard a decent amount of the time when it comes to secretive projects such as this one. So, I wouldn't doubt it, but it's not good we don't have any counter to that weapon because, that's a nuke in space. That's like as serious as it gets.
That is very serious, and there really is no good way to deal with it, even if it's in orbit. For example, if the Space Force trying to send up the X-37B to try and deal with it and possibly disarm it while it's in orbit, the Russians could just detonate it then and then pretty much knock all satellite networks offline for everyone around the world. And also, I forgot to mention this, there was a very severe effect as far as radiation in the atmosphere was concerned for decades beyond that. Well, not really decades, but really for the next 5 years beyond that point after Starfish Prime was conducted, they were still finding severe amounts of radiation in certain parts of the atmosphere. And as a matter of fact, another thing that's been attributed to the Starfish Prime test is the only hole in the ozone layer that exists in the world, which is literally directly over Australia. There's a massive hole in the ozone layer that exists directly over Australia. It's a perfect circle and extends from the very eastern seaboard of Australia to its very western seaboard. So Australia has no ozone layer, and it largely can be credited to the high-altitude tests that the United States conducted way back in the 60s, as well as a couple of other minor things that led to the degradation of the ozone layer. So you can get an idea that blowing up a nuclear weapon in orbit like that is going to be leading to some massive consequences, not just in the short term, but in the very long term, and is, of course, on a strategic level for the United States of America, and, of course, the allies that we have in Europe and the Pacific. But still, I see a lot of y'all actually have some opinions, and Matthew, I know that you have some very big opinions about what this means, because we were talking about this off stream.
Indeed. So the question that's currently running says, U.S. intel reveals Russia's plans to launch a space-based nuclear satellite weapon, and what are your thoughts? The vast majority of people say and agree that is a major security threat, while a smaller percentage says it's too early to tell, and about the same amount of people say it's serious, but not immediately so. And in my opinion, by every sense of the entire phrase itself, this is an extremely major security threat, and it might be one of the biggest threats we faced in, probably, in my opinion, over decades. And it seems like I mentioned a moment ago, the U.S. was kind of caught with their pants down a little bit with this one, which is not good. Kind of the way we were caught with our pants down on China developing a hypersonic missile as well. So hopefully we can quickly scramble to find a way to counter this weapon or prevent it from taking off or something like that, or maybe get some intel on it and know how to deactivate it, which would be a bit of a stretch at this point because we've caught it kind of late. But definitely a major threat. To be able to knock our satellites off and be able to basically shut off all communications with our military is, like I said, as serious as it gets. And I'm kind of shocked that we didn't catch this earlier. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to agree with you completely. And also, I'd like to add that the official statement at the moment is that the system is not has not been prepared and has not been launched into orbit. But while usually we like to take official reports at face value here on this channel, I do want y'all to also know that there have been official face value reports made in the Middle East by the United States recently that weren't entirely true and then were contradicted several days later once they thought the panic and pandemonium that would be caused by those statements would die down. So we know that the United States may be saying that at the moment, but in 3 to 4 days may actually say, as a matter of fact, we know that this system may in fact be in orbit at the moment. We don't really know if that's what the United States is going to say or do, but nevertheless, it does pose a massive threat and a massive risk. And I would have to agree with the majority of y'all the seriousness of this issue cannot be overstated enough. As a matter of fact, I would say if the Russians attempt to even do something like this, and they move a rocket like this to Baikonur to launch with that kind of a payload on board, and we know about it, that may as well be an official declaration of war, because doing something like that would completely compromise the United States and leave the Russians with an ability to really leverage that nuclear bomb over any country in the world that they wish. Not only their adversaries like Europe, the United States, Japan, South Korea, Australia, New Zealand, and so on, but also other countries as well, like India or China, that have a decent amount of satellites that are currently in orbit. The results of this are endless. It's a very serious concern, in my opinion, and it's something that the United States needs to react swiftly and aggressively to. Otherwise, it may be too late.
Also, I saw Leonce Pierre said in the live chat, is this space threat as serious as the Cuban Missile Crisis? In my opinion, I think this is even more serious than that, because if Russia is able to put this satellite up there, which is an anti-satellite weapon, and they can detonate a nuclear bomb up there in space and knock our satellites offline, that means they can completely catch us by surprise when they wanted to attack us, because we have really very limited ways to communicate, and it would knock all of our internet systems offline as well, or at least most of them. And, you know, once you don't have the ability to communicate, you really can't coordinate a counterstrike. So that's what is a huge deal to me, is being able to knock the communications offline. Other stuff's kind of collateral in my opinion, but that's the big one. So, you know, if they're able to get away with that, that's much more serious than the Cuban Missile Crisis.
It's way more serious, because think about it. I know a lot of people, out there in the world don't really understand the implications of people attacking our economics structure or our communication structure, or something that sounds very mundane like that. But imagine if this EMP goes off over the United States and it actually does knock out ground lines as well as our satellite communications. The President of the United States and the Department of Defense may no longer be able to communicate with any of our naval forces around the world. Aircraft carriers are going to be out there on their own, pretty much with no communications whatsoever, unless they're relayed through ground lines. And that's even if there is a way for the aircraft carrier to pick up messages that are sent by the United States at that point. And global positioning systems may be put entirely out of action. And not only on a military level is that serious, that is also quite serious on a commercial and civilian level. Imagine if GPS systems get knocked out here in the United States. Imagine the kind of chaos that is going to cause for logistics companies, because some drivers may not be able to know where their actual destination is and where they may need to go. People are going to have to start trying to figure that out very quickly if something like that was to happen. It could have massive implications on the economy. It could have massive implications on defense. It could have massive implications really in every single facet of life if something like this was to explode in low Earth orbit at this point. So going off of that, I would have to say that this is something that we need to respond very quickly to. I mean immediately. I don't know how we're going to respond. That's the issue. I would love to hear some ideas from y'all in the chat, maybe some brainstorming as to how the United States could possibly respond, because we do know at this point, we have a pretty good understanding that there are people in the Department of Defense as well as in the government that are watching this channel. So, you know, if y'all would like to give any ideas, maybe they'll be able to hear some things that they may have never considered before and try and implement them, because every citizen counts, you know.
Also, another collateral point, which kind of pales in comparison to the nuclear threat itself, is Russia has violated yet another treaty, and they're seeming to be they're going to get away with it again, because unless we decide to punish them in some way, which should be a much more severe punishment than simply sanctions, because obviously the sanctions aren't working that well. Russia keeps getting more and more escalatory. They keep getting more serious with their military tactics. So you know, we're eventually going to have to put our foot down with Russia, and you know, if this isn't the thing we put our foot down on, then I don't know what will be.
I wouldn't know either. But nevertheless, I want to make sure to get to all of the other bits of breaking news that we have tonight, because this is entirely serious, but there have been major things going on today in Ukraine and also in Russia as well. And I've kind of been debating while we've been covering this section what to bring y'all to here in this side of the world where this war still keeps grinding on. And I think I'm going to bring y'all to some really big news before we get to the massive explosions that have occurred again inside of Russia today. we're going to bring y'all down to the coast of Crimea. Because as y'all may know or may not know, today another Rapucha-class landing ship ended up becoming a part of the Russian submarine fleet. This one was the Caesar Kunikov, and we got to see video footage today from the Ukrainian naval forces showing its destruction from Ukrainian water-based drones. Here's the footage. We got that Vanos Gaming logo popping up.
Hey. Oh damn! They got the Jaws intro and everything.
Man, they're going hard.
Stuff on the screen like a chant or something.
But we can see it's of course Group 13, which is the drone force of the Ukrainian Navy. And that little beep right there, y'all, is my space heater because it's cold in this room. But we can see the drone coming in, and that right there is, without a shadow of a doubt, the Caesar Kunikov. The Caesar Kunikov is another Rapucha-class landing ship, and at this point, from what we know, it's really the only Rapucha-class landing ship that is still it was seaworthy. It's not seaworthy anymore. But we can see the drone coming in. We see no fire coming from the Caesar Kunikov, possibly showing that they don't even know that this drone is near to it. We can see a second drone out here. It switched camera positions, and we're on the second drone now. We can now see the first drone coming in very close. At this point, we can actually see individual sailors here standing on the upper decks of the Caesar Kunikov. Those are two sailors right there that you see on the film.
Dang, they're as good as the guys that are on the Titanic looking for icebergs at this point.
Oh, look, there's a third guy. Look, this guy is actually in the perfect spot. He's going to go, Ukrainian drone, dead ahead. And they're going to go, oh,
He's going to go, aye, Captain. I don't see any icebergs, Bliat, but I do see a fast-moving boat. I guess it's fine. As long as it's not an iceberg, Bliat will be fine.
Oh, man, we can see the drone getting close again. Anyone reacting on the vessel? No. Doesn't look like anyone's reacting still. No fire. No fire going towards the boat. We're not seeing any bullets bouncing up off the water. We're not seeing it on this drone.
Remember, they're old soldiers at this point. Russia's old man army. They have slow reflexes these days.
I'm guessing so, and there goes the first drone hitting. We can see the first impact there, blowing up onto the bow of the ship, setting up a massive fireball. And it appears that this drone may be going in for the attack now. I'm sure that the ship has now been alerted there are drones in the area, and we can actually see that this thing was very close to the coast, because that's the coast right there, in the background behind the ship. So this thing was maybe only a few miles away, a few mere miles away from the shore. Now we can see tracer
Also, they
fire.
thought they were safe. They were next to the shore, so they thought they were scot-free. They thought nothing would happen.
Yeah, they thought, you know what, we're gonna eliminate that attack path to the Ukrainians. It's just going to be to the starboard side of the ship. And even then, they still didn't see him coming. But now we can see, just for a brief moment there is some fire coming from the ship towards these drones. And we can see this drone coming on in, getting really close. We can see it's an all-hands-on-deck kind of a situation. There are a lot more sailors on deck now than there was earlier. Maybe a lot of them are trying to jump overboard at this point because the ship is done for. But we can see.
Put your hands on the deck, Ivan. I'm here. He's doing push-ups on the deck. My hands are on the deck, Bliat. What do I do?
And we can see that boat, that kamikaze boat, I believe, hit the Kunikov. Yep, we can. There's the massive fireball from that one. That's the second hit. And by the way, just to share this with y'all, these things are putting in a little bit of a bang. Each one of these is carrying 500 kilograms, which is about 600-something pounds of explosives. So this is pretty much like a 500-pound bomb hitting directly on the waterline of the ship each time these things hit a boat or a vessel.
And also, Miss Disa says in the live chat that the Ukrainian Intel Chief Budanov says the ship was fully loaded, so full house.
Oh yeah, it was a full house. Call this a royal flush because they got sent to the bottom today. And we can already see the damage caused by the first drone that ever hit. Oh my god, dude, the superstructure caved in. Like, that's the superstructure. Yeah. This is the waterline. That's the superstructure. It literally just folded in from the explosion.
Must be using that Chinese metal at this point.
Chinesium. They're using that tofu dread construction. And I think this is about to be the third explosion here that we see on film. And camera's bobbing up and down in the waves.
And also everybody's saying 1,100 pounds, apparently, on the explosive amount.
Good God! That's actually a lot more. That's two 500-pound bombs. I can do a little bit of math. But anyways, that's the end of that little clip right there. And right after we got that clip, it then came out a little bit later that the Caesar Kunikov actually sank to the bottom of the sea. This was a little bit of a video or some kind of an angle of the explosion in the distance because the attack happened at night, but the Kunikov eventually started to pick up a list, rolled over, and sank to the bottom of the sea to join the Moskva and the almost other dozen Russian warships that had been destroyed and sunk over the course of the war. This it was one of the last Raputia-class landing ships that was operational in the Russian Navy, just knocked out. It's pretty big news, as a matter of fact. This is major because the Russian Navy is continuously being defeated by incredibly inexpensive and cheap drones from the Ukrainian Navy. The Ukrainian Navy, as far as their overall expenditures and losses over the course of the war, are nowhere close to what the Russians have been losing. The Ukrainians have lost, well, hell, I believe they scuttled a good amount of their fleet at the beginning of the war, to be entirely honest with y'all. But the Ukrainian Navy is a fraction of the cost of what the Russian Black Sea Fleet cost to build back during Soviet times. The Russians have lost practically nearly 40 to 50% of the combat fleet of the Black Sea Fleet, which is pretty impressive when you put it in that perspective, and it's showing that the Russians are probably not going to have a Black Sea Fleet once the war concludes. But moving on from that bit of news, because we still have a lot of big breaking news throughout the entirety of the country, not only in Ukraine, but also in Russia. We got to hear today something fairly interesting. I'm just going to bring y'all over to a side note here before we move on to bigger and greater things. Apparently, while the Russians are absolutely just winning the war, according to Putin, Putin has said something interesting today that I just felt really came full circle on that interview that he had about a week ago that many of y'all know is infamous at this point. Apparently, he said that he didn't like the interview. Did you hear that, Matthew?
He didn't like the interview with Tucker Carlson?
He didn't like it. He said that Tucker Carlson is a dangerous person because he tries to act like he listens.
Oh boy! Well, I'll tell you what, Tucker Carlson's getting flack from pretty much every side at this point.
Dude,
He's not exempt from even Putin.
It's a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation because the people in the past that actually got to direct questions and asked sharp questions, Putin said, these people are typical Western journalists. Look at these sick beasts. And then you sit there and you go, you know what? I'm going to let him have a 30-minute rant on fake history. And then he goes, the bastard didn't interrupt me to ask sharp questions. He's not to be trusted. It's like, it's literally a damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of a situation with that guy. It's best just to view him as an enemy of the United States, because even the people who try to interview him and maybe even look a little sympathetic to his cause end up getting blasted in the end. So, kind of ironic in my opinion, and that's why I told y'all shouldn't worry about it, because it was going to come full circle either way. And that's something that
that to me confirms that that Putin didn't go into that interview thinking that Tucker Carlson was going to be, you know, like the savior interview for the Western world. He went into that simply to repeat his propaganda points, to score points with his domestic audience in Russia, to replay that. That's why he punked Carlson a few times during the interview, so that way he could replay it and allow those pundits in Russia to get a couple of, I guess you could say kudos or like points for some of those little quip quotes that he had for Carlson.
Yeah, and I gotta say this too. Something that a small group of Americans, and I don't care what people say these days, it is still a fairly small group of Americans, don't get about the Russians is that the Russians view no American as their friend. You might like the Russians, but the Russians don't like you. And that's a very clear indicator and a clear picture of that we just saw right there. And many of y'all know, and this is actually something that has been confirmed a little bit in the past, Tucker is not necessarily a neutral or pro-Ukrainian person. He has actually said in the past, screw Ukraine, the Russians are on the right side, at least twice from what I've seen. So it's not like he's a unbiased neutral party in that regard. He goes over there. The Russian government, of course, knows this about him because the FSB probably did a lot of background research into him. And then still, Putin will make him out, because he's an American, to be an enemy of Russia, even if he is sympathetic to their cause. And that is something that I think is very important for people to remember. It does not matter what kind of propaganda the Russians try to spoon-feed you about how they're the right side of history and the West is wrong. That's not what they're actually trying to do. They're trying to get poor suckers to join them and trying to tear down the West so that way they can build Russia up and then screw everyone over that's not a Russian by the end of it. It is something very important to remember, and I think that's a good lesson that everyone could take out of that interview right there. And hopefully, I would hope that that people like Tucker would have a little bit of common sense here and realize what just happened. He was sympathetic to the Russians. Putin sent there and absolutely pimped him out on air and made him sound like a clown, that like he was only an entertainer, he's not a real journalist, and then also made fun of him for wanting to ever try and join the CIA, and then said that he wasn't even a good interviewer at the end of it. It ended up just making the Americans look like they were owned on Russian state TV. That's all it ended up being, was a propaganda coup domestically for the Russians. Also,
Tucker wasn't even smart enough not to drink the tea. If you notice, he actually drank whatever liquid that Putin's men gave him. He was drinking it, and that's like a big no-no in Russia. You don't ever drink the tea or anything like that you're given. It's kind of a joke, but at the same time, you really don't actually. And then also when Tucker got back to his hotel room after the interview was over, and he gave like a sort of like a post-game interview or something to that effect. He sat in his room, which was surely bugged by the FSB, and sat there and kind of made some somewhat disparaging remarks about Putin, because I guess Tucker was a little irritated that he got kind of punked during the interview, which was stupid in itself, as you know that they're monitoring what's going on in that room. So all the way around, I don't think Tucker understood exactly what he was getting into.
Yeah, and I don't really think he did, but I think, once again, because I want to make this quite clear, I do not want to get into politics on this channel, and we never will. But one thing that's very important is that there is a small outlier, I would say maybe 20% of the country, 25%, that truly believe that Russia is the good side and that Russia actually loves America. It's just that the powers that be that tear Russia and America apart, do not be mistaken. The Russians are the ones that are that power that are tearing America and Russia apart. There was real efforts being made by the United States in the 90s and the early 2000s to try and bring Russia into the Western world. We did that with everyone. Hell, we've even done that with Vietnam. And if we end up being friends with Vietnam, we can become friends with anybody, because Vietnam is truly one of the most controversial countries we've ever had dealings with in this nation's history. If we can do that, we can do anything. And the fact that the Russians are in the position they are now and they're adversarial to the United States is because they are trying to build their own sphere of influence that will compete with the United States, which is a very unrealistic possibility, and destroy our sphere of influence and our way of life in our world. And anyone who will further their cause, it is a lot like the Nazis trying to get Jews onto their side in World War II and use them in the camps against other Jews. It is not something that you will end up being on the winning side of. You're just a pawn in a bad nation's game, and you'll end up being disposed of like the rest of their enemies once they're done. That's the reality of it. And that's something that many of y'all may not know either, is that the German SS during World War II actually recruited Jewish soldiers and Jewish members. And these Jewish soldiers of the SS actually ended up conducting the exact same atrocities and crimes that the rest of the SS conducted against the Jews and Eastern Europeans during World War II. And at the end of the war, those people were held accountable, just like the rest of the Germans, for the crimes that they conducted and committed. And even sometimes later on, the Germans just decided, you know what? We've gotten enough out of this one. We're going to send them to the camps with the rest of them. And that's something to remember, is that is the way that dictatorships and thugs always work. If you're silly enough to listen to their song and dance and follow along with it, it's only a matter of time before they figure out that they've used you as much as they can and throw you to the wayside, a lot like the Nazi Germans did to some Jews during World War II. But moving on from that, and the allegory in between the Nazis and the modern day Russian Federation, I gotta be honest with y'all, not to sound like a broken record like everyone likes to say these days, the bad guy is literally Hitler. The Russians are truly moving down that path. It's really wild to see them almost mirroring exactly what the Germans did, and then to see Putin in that interview justify what Hitler did with the invasion of Poland.
That was wild. Yeah, that was wild to me. It's like their whole propaganda shtick is that they're going to Ukraine to quote-unquote denazify it. But then at the same time, in the same speech that Putin was giving about the whole topic of invading Ukraine, he said, he was making the argument that Hitler wasn't that bad. It's like, what the hell? He can't even keep his own story straight at this point. He's gotten so delusional.
Yeah, he was sitting there talking about Russia has its interests, just like Germany under Hitler had their interests, and the world would have been smart to stay out of Hitler's way and just let him pursue his interests. It's like, wait a minute. It's
if Tucker was a good journalist, he should have said, "Well, aren't you going to Ukraine to denazify it?" But then that would have been like, the guillotine. There you go right over there and put your head on it.
Yeah, because he didn't ask enough pointed questions, so Putin hated him for that. But if he had asked pointed questions, Putin would have hated him and then had him killed. He was going to be hated either way. It's just a choice in between living and dying before you left Russia. But moving on from that news, and getting back into what's really going on for the Russians, while the Russians act like everything's well under control, they are losing a large part of their navy. And a lot of people have been talking about, can Russia even afford ship losses like these, considering that most of the combat vessels have been lost at this point? At least half of them nearly have been lost. And Matthew, I think a lot of people have had some input on that.
So they have, and the question is, can Russia afford more ship losses after they lost that Rapucha-class ship near Crimea? It looks like the most people say that yes, Russia does have a few ships left, so I guess they can afford a couple more, getting sunk and becoming submarines. That was actually a sarcastic answer, but it's the most popular for some reason. And then about 34% said no, Russia's losing too many ships, and 13% said it doesn't matter anyway. And to me, obviously, I think Russia is losing too many ships. You can't afford to lose ship after ship like Russia's doing and keep your Navy in operating shape. That simply doesn't work. Also, Russia doesn't have the money to fix these vessels if they're even repairable at this point. So, to me, the Russian Navy appears to be going bye-bye. And that's a good thing for Ukraine. But, Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to agree completely. The Russian Navy is getting beasted on by a nation without a Navy. And that's... It's the weirdest thing because it sounds like such a stupid statement. It almost sounds like a comic book kind of like, the superhero won the day. Kind of a statement to say that they're getting beat by a nation without a Navy, but it's literally true. The Ukrainians scuttled most of hang on, let me go. Ukrainian Navy ships. Let me go show y'all what the Ukrainians had and what they don't have anymore. Because this is insane to really look at and think about let me see here. I think they delisted it here on Wikipedia. Yeah, they did. Because it was scuttled, so nobody even cares that it existed at any point. But let me show y'all the biggest ship that's in the Ukrainian Navy. It's this one right here. That is the biggest ship in the Ukrainian Navy. This isn't even...
Oh, goodness.
This isn't even a missile boat. This thing is literally, practically just a minesweeper. And I think, what is this actual classification? It's an X-missile boat. So this thing is literally just a patrol boat at this point with a 76mm gun. And that's it. That's all it has. And this is the biggest ship in the Ukrainian Navy. The biggest one. They actually had a frigate at the beginning of the war, but they ended up scuttling it in Mykolaiv because they thought Mykolaiv was going to be overrun, and they didn't want the ship being captured by the Russians, so they scuttled it and sank it at its moorings. So this is the biggest ship. The biggest one. It's smaller than almost every single combat vessel in the Russian Black Sea Fleet, save like 3 or 4 of them that have already been sunk and destroyed as well. And this Navy has destroyed half of the Black Sea Fleet's combat vessels. When you really put that into perspective, it's hilarious. It is honestly a sad story because it is literally, like, I'm trying to figure out a way to explain it. It is like the Battle of Tsushima, where the Russian Navy went up against the Japanese fleet in 1904, and the Russians thought it would be a sweep because the Japanese, were an isolationist country just about 40 years before, and it really had absolutely nothing to do with the outside world. And then the Japanese ended up flooring the Russian Empire's fleet. It was funnily enough, I believe it was the Black Sea Fleet, or the Baltic Fleet, one or the other. It was the Baltic Fleet because they had to sail around Britain. But they ended up leveling the Baltic Fleet and ended up taking practically no losses and destroying the entire Russian Navy. It's a lot like that, but this is over the course of an entire war. It is a joke. It is honestly a joke at this point how well the Ukrainians have been doing as far as destroying the Russian Navy. And I think they could afford to lose a few more ships because that means they'll have literally nothing left once the war ends. Whether it is a draw or whether they completely lose, they're going to have absolutely nothing left. But with that, we're going to be moving on from that little funny side. Now, I just wanted to show y'all what the Russians are really going up against and losing heavily to is a navy like that. And they're getting beat by it. Now, imagine what would happen if the British Navy even went up against the Russian Navy. I mean, that would be one hell of a sight right there. The British don't even have that big of a navy, but they still have a lot more ships than the Ukrainians have, and actually ships that are of the frigate size, or the destroyer size. They would probably level the Russian Navy on their own. And that would be something fun to watch, in my honest opinion. But nevertheless, we're going to be moving on from the naval news and on into Russia, because there is a lot of big news that has been coming out of the Russian Federation for the past 24 hours specifically. a lot of attacks, both by the Ukrainian military and the partisans, and they've been causing some serious damage to Russian infrastructure and military equipment well behind the lines, way away from where any battle is actually being fought in Ukraine. But before we get to that, I want to make sure to address a couple of super chats and thank y'all for helping to keep the channel running and answer any questions y'all may have. And so, Matthew, what do we got?
All right, and first up, I want to give a big shout out to a longtime channel viewer, Say What, who put in a very generous $50 donation. And sadly, with that massive support, he did not leave a comment. But thank you very much for always being a longtime viewer of the channel and also supporting us as well. Because as y'all know, this is the way the entire channel keeps running, and it's funded entirely by y'all. So y'all make it possible, like PBS, like we always say. But Enforcer, what say you?
And I gotta thank you, Say What, for that massive support. You didn't throw in a comment, but you helped to keep the fires of the Lee Spring Army running. Folks like you.
Say what?
Folks, say what? I mean, really. I mean, say what? Folks like you help us to keep this news running tonight. And I hope that you've been able to enjoy this first hour of it. We've gotten through an entire hour of news already, and there is still a lot more to come. But folks like you who support this channel, supporters of the Lee Spring Army that help this channel to keep on rolling, are what makes it possible for me to give you all this news every single night. I thank every single one of you, and especially you, Say What, for your support tonight and helping this channel to keep running. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And the next one goes to Marija Milushev, and I hope I'm not butchering your name because I have a feeling I might be.
Milushev.
Thank you very much, Maria Milushev.
I didn't mean to say it like that. I was just making sure I said it right.
But thank you very much, Maria, for that $50 support. Also extremely generous. And she said the tank is a T-34. The Moscow parade has never been canceled before. The parade can't cease to exist. This year, there might be a twist. Just 4 days after Cinco de Mayo, the T will be back a tank in denial, a so-called armada, or maybe a proryev, or ...
And then it ended there, sadly. But thank you so much for the massive support, Maria Milushev, and helping this channel to keep on running. And also, the last year we saw that the Russians apparently had run out of tanks within the Moscow area and ended up only using one T-34, which is an ancient tank from World War II's time in history, 80 years ago. And I'm going to go show y'all a picture of this, just so that way y'all know what tank I'm talking about. It's this one right here. This one was actually in Minsk, in Belarus, but nevertheless, it's kind of the same story. It's a T-34-85. These things were actually fairly used a good bit during World War II by the Soviet Union, especially from about 1943 onwards. But the tank was terrible. I mean, like anyone who actually used one of these things or ever has been around one, they'll tell you that they're absolutely awful. And there's a reason why. The Soviet Union found out that these tanks would practically survive about 6 months, and so they only designed them and only had them built to survive 6 months. Because by that point, they assumed that the tank would be destroyed and the crew would be dead, so it wouldn't matter if the tank survived any longer than that. So that's why the build quality on these things was so terrible and so horrendous. That wasn't really the design philosophy in any other country. Germany planned on their tanks lasting literally forever, which is absolutely stupid because the transmission lasted literally like 5 miles and then it'd blow up. And then the United States designed our tanks where they were smooth, fine running machines because they were built by none other than General Motors and other great companies at the time that were producing some of the finest automobiles in the world. If you wanted a good car, you bought a Cadillac, and Cadillac ended up also building a good amount of Shermans during the war. But beyond that, these things are terrible. And I gotta be honest with you, Maria, I think that when we see the victory parade come around this year, it's probably going to be headed off the same as it was last year. Probably with just the one T-34-85, maybe some armored cars, and that's going to be it. That's going to be the armored section. But as last year, the armored section was literally non-existent. It was the T-34-85, it was a couple of Tiger armored cars, and then that was it. That was literally the end of the armored column. There was no flyover. The parade ended. So I would have to say, I think that's what it's going to be. I don't even think they're going to whip out an armada because I think all of their operational armadas are in the training fields right now and are not near Moscow, so they probably wouldn't want to load them up on trains and transport them to Moscow just for a parade. They're probably going to keep them at the training grounds because the Russians are truly broke. I mean, they're poor, and they probably don't even want to spend the money or the expense to load those armadas back up onto a train, ship them off to Moscow, drop them off for the parade. But nevertheless, thank you so much once again for the mass amount of support, Maria Milashev, and helping this channel to keep on running. Folks like you make this thing entirely possible, and if it wasn't for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to keep this channel running. We wouldn't be able to make it possible. I always want to thank every single one of y'all for the support, because the Lee Spring Army helps to make the fundraisers possible, and it helps to make the channel itself possible that the fundraisers exist on. Every single time that someone throws in support, the fires of this channel continue to burn strong and continue to shine above really every other Ukraine war community on YouTube. And the way we're able to report the news, the way we're able to cover it, the amount of detail that we're able to go into, and the amount of support that we're able to give to Ukraine by running those Sunday fundraisers. The Lee Spring Army is truly the most incredible organization out there, and every single super chatter on this channel, every single one of y'all, whether it just be $1 or whether it just be $500, each and every one of y'all helps the channel to keep on running in its way, in its own special, unique way, and keep this community, the channel, and the fundraisers alive. And I gotta thank you for that support, Maria, and I hope I was able to address that well. And with that, we are on to the final question of this segment, and then we're going to be getting right into the news again inside of Russia.
All right, and the last one goes to an absolute channel corner piece, the longtime channel legend, BC Skyman.
Hey!
And BC, I announced your entrance tonight like you were Mike Tyson coming into the ring. So thank you very much, BC, for that $20 support. And sadly, no comment to address with this one either. But of course, BC, we appreciate it very much. And Enforcer, what say you?
And a night would not be complete without BC Skyman being here and BC Skyman throwing in a super chat. Those things are always guaranteed. And I got to thank you so much for the support tonight, BC Skyman, and helping this channel to keep running. You didn't throw in a comment, but I know what your comment would be if you did throw in one, because there's been so many times as you throw in the comment, and every single time, you are one of the biggest supporters with the kindest words to this channel. I gotta thank you so much for that, BC Skyman, and I gotta say, it is absolutely amazing to have you here with us tonight, and to know that you want to see the Lee Spring Army continue to march on, and for the Enforcer to continue to live on. I gotta thank you so much for that once again, and I want y'all to know something really quick that Matthew and me are very proud of. This channel right now is at 159,995 subscribers. It is an incredibly high number. We're only 5 subscribers away at this point from 160,000 subscribers. Some of y'all may know that a long time ago, this channel had actually reached the peak, the absolute peak that this channel has ever reached, which was way back on October 4th of 2023, which was 160,166 subscribers. That was the absolute peak that this channel reached before we ended up being, going through a little tumultuous event that many of y'all were around to witness. And since then, we have kind of been in the behind the scenes in this channel, kind of viewing this as the dark age of the Enforcer channel, because our reach wasn't that great. Our subscriber number never recovered. In fact, over several months, it was slowly diminishing day by day. About 10 to 20 subscribers were leaving, and we weren't ever getting any more back. And I was thinking that this channel may be down and out. But finally, one day, when I dropped out of law school, and Matthew did too on the exact same day, I decided that we're not going to be quitters, and we're not going to let that go. Hell or high water, this channel and this army that exists through this channel will continue to persevere and survive on into the many years that go on. Even beyond the Ukraine war itself, this Lee Spring Army and this channel will survive and will continue to prosper. And that's when I started to put in a lot of effort into making sure that this channel will come back. And over the course of 1 month, we went from 156,600 subscribers to nearly 160,000 tonight. And I believe we have actually crossed that number. We are at 160,007 subscribers at this very moment. The channel is about to be back, and the Dark Ages are about to end. We know that with the end of the Dark Ages, there will be many people out there trying to come back and make sure that this channel stays down. But I can promise y'all this. As long as there is breath in my body, and there's breath in Enforcer Matt's body, and we still have the strength to go on, this channel will continue to fight to stay on air, continue to cover this news until the war ends and even beyond. We're going to make sure that this community never dies, because when I say the Lee Spring Army will never die, I truly mean it. And I hope that all of y'all continue to make sure the Lee Spring Army wins on every battlefield that we find ourselves on, not only for Ukraine, but for the existence of this channel as well, because it is absolutely incredible to know the Lee Spring Army will never die, and the Lee Spring Army will always prevail. Put a Lee Spring Army in the chat if you agree.
And also, by the way, we have a ton of new people here tonight. I see one new person here, Duct Tape Philosophy, said, "You're welcome," and I also just subscribed as well. So welcome to the LSA to you. And also, I saw several other people saying the same thing, that they just found us tonight and they're subscribing. So if you haven't already, press that subscribe button. You could be our 160th subscriber. And if you subscribe, you might get cookie, like Mr. Beast says. It apparently worked for him, so we'll try it ourselves too and see how it goes. But if you're new, make sure you press that sub button. Also press the like button as well, because that helps the channel out in the algorithm, which helps us get the news out there even farther. So huge thanks to you all for that.
And I gotta say, once again, the Lee Spring Army never dies. And thank you all once again for flooding the chat, because I'm looking at it right now and it's going about 200 chats a minute. I think it's actually going 300 now. So many of y'all are throwing in LSAs, and I love to see the Lee Spring Army is as strong as it's ever been, and is probably going to be stronger than it ever has been before. We're going to continue to keep on running, because I got to tell you, it really hypes me up to see so many people putting LSA in the chat. I love to see it. But with that, we're now going to be moving on with determination and vigor into the rest of the news for the night. Starting off with our big news inside the city of Kursk, as the Ukrainians were able to hit a major oil depot, sending it alight and burning it to the ground. Here's the clip that we got today. And let me get it for y'all. The bottom's blurred out because the Russians think that OPSEC's a thing when an oil depot blows up and catches on fire, but, you know, the target's already been hit. So I don't really think you need to blur it out because they already blew it up. It's not like you're hiding anything for, you know, good reasons. But moving on to the next clip, we got to see an unedited version of the Kursk oil depot fire, or more so a picture of it. You can see the fuel silos right back there. You can see the explosion right there. You can also see this little video here to the side showing the massive inferno coming from the oil depot.
Man, that's a doozy.
Man, that's a real doozy right there. Someone left the stove on.
Very unfortunate. It burned down the wood house.
Very unfortunately, because the Russians, Matthew, one thing that you'll never divide the Russians from is their soul. And then, you know, Matthew, that interview had a lot of memeable crap in it. And also, if y'all don't know, that was the last thing that Putin said in the interview, is that he said, one thing that the world will never be able to divide the Russians from is their soul. And it's like, yeah, I'm sure the alcoholics can never be separated from their soul. You know, it's like, that makes sense. But anyways.
Yeah. Also, it's like, I don't think Russia ever really had a soul. They've always been known for being a cold, very tough and hard people, even before the war broke out. So I'm not like, you know, what soul are they talking about exactly?
Man, I have absolutely no idea. But I'll tell you something. Some Russians do have soul, Matthew. And I gotta say, they really showed it tonight. There was a supply truck, Matthew, a Ural 4320, that was driving through the Rostov-on-Don Oblast, and I think you get where I'm going with this. They had 30 Zala drones in the back of the supply truck, and all 30 of those Zala drones are about $1 million combined. And the truck pulled over on the side of the road to take a break and for the driver to take a nap that night. Partisans drove up behind the truck and threw in a Molotov and burned down the entire truck and all $1 million of the Zala drones that were inside of it. Here's a clip. Epic intro for the Partisans.
Oh, wow. They definitely got this off a fiver, I guarantee you.
And there he goes with the Molotov. There's the Ural. And it's on fire. There goes $1 million of Zalas right there.
They're going to park the car behind it, man? They're crazy.
And then they drove by later, and the thing is just roaring. I mean, it's an inferno.
Zala, zala, zing, zala, zala, zing.
And we see one guy, he's like, "Blitz, masala, blitz." He's trying to get in the burning Ural and pull him out.
He had to take his shirt off and try to beat the fire out. Oh, look, they had a whole Molotov. This must be the Molotov Brigade here.
And look, here's their telegram. It says, Nash Telegram, which means our telegram, and then it gives you the hyperlink for it. Hey, I like these partisans. They're very open about what they do. But 30 Zalas, $1 million of drones destroyed with a single Molotov. That is something right there. I mean, what did that Molotov cost them? Like 300 rubles, which is about equivalent to 50 cents. I mean, it was absolutely nothing. It was pretty cheap.
And that was a valuable bottle of vodka right there. That was a big sacrifice for them.
A valuable sacrifice for their own. But anyways, moving on from that, and down into Rostov, the Russians didn't even need a partisan to knock out these supplies. A Russian soldier was inside of his, his little Euro 4320, and he sat there, and he started to listen to Tokyo Drift, that song that goes, ding, 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 bing, bing, bing. You know that song, Matthew? You know that song?
Yeah, I know that one.
So he started listening to that, and he went, on the Tokyo, bleh! And he crashed the freaking truck and freaking flipped it over. Crushed the cab.
Oh, damn.
And spilled the supplies.
That didn't hold up well.
Look at this. He spilled the supplies across the highway. So it's just all over the place. Then the Euro's blocking the highway. Supplies are everywhere. It looks like the driver might be in a bad shape. And yeah,
he might have started walking flat-footed after he got out of that thing, or like a pancake.
Dude, he came out and he looked like Tom and Jerry after he got dropped. The iron got dropped on top of him. He's just flattened. That's what he looks like. But he ended up also clipping a couple of cars as well on his way of flipping over. So, Tony is out there still. I mean, y'all thought that Tony was done and gone with in Kherson last year. But Tony lives on through the spirit of the Russian army, and he continues to flip over endless amounts of vehicles and cause irreparable damage like this. All I can say is that we love to see it, and it's absolutely beautiful, and I hope that we get to see this again sometime soon, because they are flipping these things over like it's some kind of a contest at this point. Moving on.
The Russians are going to have to go on like a Stop the Violence tour or something here in a little while, because the Russian violence is getting out of hand out here.
And you say, "Bled, man, I need to freaking flip off on my truck for the motherland." And then he flips the freaking thing.
Your odds of getting killed or hurt by the incompetent Russian soldiers is like tenfold higher than actually getting hit with the Ukrainian missile at this point.
Man, people are getting smacked out there by the unsuspecting Euro driver. Oh man, dude, it kills me to think about the stupidity that goes on behind the lines for the Russians. But moving on from that, this was actually something I found really interesting, is that we got to see a little air defense setup near Kyiv. It's in the northern area of the country, and it was pretty primitive looking, but then once again, this is fairly standard for what Ukrainian air defense looked like pre-Western support. Let me show it to y'all. So, it says an M2 Browning, and no, that is, well, actually, yeah, that is an M2 Browning. I was about to say, it looks kind of like a Dishka or an NSV, but those are kind of similar. But this is a small pickup truck that they've taken the rear bed off of and mounted an M250 caliber on, and then they have some spotlights. And what they do is that they put the spotlight on the drone, and then they go, "There it is, get him!" And then they just light it up with the 50 cal. Yeah, it's Batman, and then they just shoot it down. Overall, it's been proven to be a fairly good system at closer ranges, but not the best out there. But still, I like to see these kinds of air defense systems, and I also like to see the mattress that they have beside the truck. Shows you they sleep where they work, But beyond that, really cool, really nice. Of course, it's Ukrainian air defense. This may look simple, but honestly, from what we've seen, Ukrainian air defense is about the best it gets these days, weirdly enough. But moving on from that, and down into the area of our location unknowns, which I don't have any for the day before or the day before that, I just have some for today, we got to see some very interesting stuff around here. First off, we got to see that a Chinese ATV got obliterated by an FPV drone.
A Russian-Chinese wheelbarrow.
That's what the caption calls it. I don't know what the hell they were getting at there, to be entirely honest with you. But it is a Chinese ATV. Or a Chinese gator is the best way to describe it. There it is. And look at him. He's like, yes, we're really picking up speed. And then, ooh. I did a little quick zoom in.
Man, these Russians sure do know how to drive these wheelbarrows pretty fast. You need to chill out.
Ooh, right on. I don't know what the hell that is, but we
hell no. No. We ain't watching that.
Hell no.
Get
That's
off of that. This is a child-friendly channel. Reports on war and death.
Romania.
Oh, man. It was unintentional.
Just wait, hang on. Oh, man. Romania.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. But moving on from that, I got to show y'all a rare sight. What some people, if they were trained spotters in the military world, would call, "Oh man, this is a treat." It's at BMP-1U on the Russian side. Now, this is actually really interesting. The Ukrainians are the only people in the world who have built BMP-1Us. They're BMP-1s that have a BTR-4 turret on them. But here's the catch. Ukraine sold some of these to Georgia, and when Georgia got invaded in 2008, Russia captured 14 of these things from the Georgians. And so these 14 have continued to serve on in the Russian army. And we can see them here with orc armor, like literal orc armor. This is some crap that you'd see in a fantasy movie on the side of this thing, and also a cheap chicken wire cup cage on top of the turret. But beyond that, it's one of the few BMP-1Us that is in Russian service, which is really interesting to see, and it's kind of weird to think the history that has gone through. Sold by Ukraine to Georgia, the Russians capture it, and now it's being used in Ukraine. Hopefully we see these things destroyed, but, you know, we'll have to just wait and hope that one of them really is blown away. But moving on from that, and on into our last bit of Location Unknown news, it's time for us to get on into that casualty report, that sweet, sweet casualty report. And I think y'all are really going to like this, but sadly, I hate to say it, we don't have the casualty report for the 14th of February, which is today. Kyiv Independent did not publish one, and I went on to the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense's website, and the last thing that they posted on their website was way back in October of 2023. So I'm having a feeling they don't have the accurate casualty report on the Ministry of Defense's website either. So I'm going to be showing y'all yesterday's, and hopefully today's will have come out at some point. But here we go.
Oh, ooh, lovely. I love to see it. I'm telling you what. 4 Bobcats in a day, and all the other categories are high. Very, very lovely to see.
Very lovely to see. 4 Bobcat skid steers destroyed. 1,090 Russian troops wiped out. 27 armored personnel carriers destroyed, finally surpassing 12,000 APCs destroyed. 24 trucks knocked out. 8 main battle tanks destroyed, along with 19 artillery pieces, 30 drones, and 1 anti-aircraft warfare system, and of course the 1 ship, which will be on tomorrow's casualty report. But beyond that, it is very nice to see these kinds of numbers. And really quickly, I'm actually going to be taking this off screen and seeing if the Kyiv Independent has published today's casualty report at some point. Because when I went and looked earlier, they hadn't, and they still have not. So I don't know what happened to today's casualty report. I could not find it. It's not out there. But a lot of people told me that today, it was official, the Russians have lost 400,000 men killed in Ukraine, which would be an incredibly high number. But nevertheless, we don't have that casualty report right now, so we'll be waiting for tomorrow to get that casualty report. And by the way, I just wanted to share this with y'all, you know, something a little special to me. And hopefully, y'all will all be excited to be here tomorrow for it. Tomorrow, February 15th of 2024, is my 22nd birthday. And I'm going to be on air with all of y'all tomorrow. So make sure to show up, because it's going to be not only another war news stream, it's also going to be the stream on my birthday. Much like many of y'all have come here onto this channel to celebrate y'all's birthdays, I'm going to be celebrating my birthday with y'all, so it's a reverse. It's an Uno reverse. Instead of y'all celebrating your birthday with me, I'm going to be celebrating my birthday with y'all. So make sure to be here tomorrow. This is going to be really fun. We're not going to have like any birthday like festivities or anything, but I'd love to know that y'all would all be here on my birthday. That would be really cool. But moving on.
And here's your happy birthday early, happy birthday present. I am happy to report that we have reached 160,033 subscribers. So we have passed the 160,000 not dollar, but the 160,000 subscriber mark. So a big old yeah for that. Yeah! And thank you all very much for subscribing. And we're actually just, I believe, about 110 or 120 away from surpassing that old golden age figure from where we were back in the day. So we're about to get past that figure probably by the end of the night tonight or early tomorrow morning. So huge thanks to you all for subscribing as well, because our subscriber numbers are going berserk right now. Like the graph is like almost like straight up like in the last few minutes. So very impressive, and thank you all very much.
And also to share something else with y'all, we are 133 subscribers away from ending the Dark Ages on this channel. So, you know, we're going to be very close. We may even pass that tomorrow. And if we do, that is going to be one hell of a birthday for me. The Dark Ages will have officially ended on my birthday. That will be really cool to see, and hopefully that'll happen. But moving on from that, and on into our next bits of news, here on the front lines of Ukraine, we saw a little bit of action happening in the northeast. And really quickly, to give you all a reason why we're doing it this way tonight, I'm not going to be going over any frontline analysis outside of Avdiivka, because nothing has changed on any part of the front line except for in Avdiivka. That's really the area where it's important to look at those changes. But moving on into the northeastern direction, we got to see that a Russian BTR-82 got blown up by its own mine. Check this out. And I saw Michael Ellen TV say, Enforcer, you're an aquarium. And yes, I'm an aquarium. That's just, but anyways, here's the clip. And man, look at that thing sizzle. Oh, and there it is. There's one of the mines. And we can see the giant freaking crater caused by the lash mine that they ran over, blowing the deck of the BTR out. And that's the end of the clip right there, showing the Russians blowing up one of their own BTRs, which is great to see. And also, I was just told that we could find the casualty report online. So let me really quickly go get that, because someone said, it was actually Marcia Tucker said that we could get the casualty report from them for the day. And let me go see if I can find it, and it should be here. It should be around here. It's getting about that time of the day where everyone puts out their casualty report. And let's see. I'm not seeing it, actually.
Let's see. I was doing a quick search for it because I know the page. Oh, you did?
I did. I found it. This is for the 14th of February. Oh, wait, hang on. Let me close down this video first and then bring this over. So, this was on the 14th of February of this year. This is the casualty report. 1,060 Russian soldiers lost, along with 9 main battle tanks, 39 APCs, 66 artillery pieces, a whopping number, probably one of the highest of the war, and I bet Mysticia has that number, 3 MLRSs, 4 anti-aircraft warfare systems, 39 drones, 39 vehicles and fuel tanks, and 5 Bobcat skid steers.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. That's better than 4. I'm telling you what.
Hey, baby! That's it, and I love to see it. Love to see it. And the losses are getting really close. We are very close to watching the Russians surpass 400,000 dead. And while that doesn't necessarily sound like anything to celebrate because it's 400,000 dead people, we have to remember that every time a Russian soldier is killed in Ukraine, the war is being brought in a small fraction of the way closer to ending. So the higher the casualties are, hopefully the quicker the war will end. And some people look at it in stupid ways. There are war hippies out there, best way for me to describe them, that sit there and go, "Aw, man, celebrating death isn't good. You should never celebrate the death even of your nation's enemies. Aw, man." And then they sit there and they go to Ukraine and, and then they act like, "Aw, man, look at me. I'm firing an RPG, a weapon that kills people. I'm so cool." It's like some stupid stuff like that. But nevertheless, we celebrate it here because this means that the Russians are getting a little bit closer to ending the war as these casualties continue to stay this high. So, hopefully we'll get to see something like that. And also, 425,000 soldiers were not lost on D-Day alone, because that would be war-ending if those casualties were sustained on a single day. I think the U.S., I think all Allied landing forces lost around 3,000 soldiers on June 6th, not including the other days that were involved in, I guess, the Normandy landings, which I think went on out to like the 12th or the 16th of June when the landings were officially ended and the Battle of France, the Second Battle of France kind of began again. But yeah, 425,000 people being killed in a single day would surely be the greatest loss to human life in a single day in history. But nevertheless, moving on from this casualty report, which is pretty impressive, we're now going to be moving on to Kuzovivka, where we got to see a BMP-2 of the Ukrainian army engaging some Russian targets at a distance. There's the BMP-2 of the Ukrainians. We can actually say that this one has a cope cage on it. Pretty unique. And there they go, driving on along. This thing's getting ready to blast some fools, you know what I mean? It's about to start leveling people.
Man, smoke 'em, John.
Prank him, John. You know it.
yeah, prank 'em, John. That's
Smoke him,
didn't
John.
Say smoke 'em. How's a different the alternative timeline on that one?
Hi, I'm Mark Zuckerberg. We're gonna be smoking John. That's it. I got Sweet Baby Ray's here. Oh man,
don't ever put Mark Zuckerberg on a battlefield. He'll be out there like standing on the battlefield talking about, over here we have some sleeping Russians and some Sweet Baby Rays. Oh dear.
Dude, he would have out like the seasoning brush, you know, like they used for the mustard back in the day. He'd be putting in Sweet Baby Rays. Man, keep him away from the battlefield, man. It'd be a sight. But we can see the BMP-2 here laying out the heat, the sweet southern heat, which you can buy at your local store. Sweet Baby Rays. But that's the end of that clip.
That barrel was shaking with anger. Did you see that? Like, it was just jumping around.
Man, that thing's going, dude, the grouping on that's got to be terrible, man, because that thing's like swaying like 2 degrees to the left and then 2 degrees to the right. Look at this. Jeez. Jeez,
Really?
Louise. Yeah, the grouping on that ain't going to be great.
I like how it just throws those massive like casings out like in front of the vehicle like that. Like it seems like it would like roll back to the driver's hatch or something.
Oh yeah, when the driver's hatch is open, that's actually an issue that they have sometimes, is that they'll roll onto the driver's like shoulder and then onto his neck, and it'll like burn him. It's been an actual issue I've seen before, because I remember one time we were watching a clip, Matthew, and the Ukrainians were firing the B&B, and the driver's sitting there, and then one of the shells rolled onto his neck. You just heard him go, "Blah!" And then he like flung the shell off. Like that was a long
Hell,
time
I can
ago.
understand those casings are probably like red hot, like crazy hot. Like that burned the hell out of your shoulder.
Dude, those things are hot enough that if you wrapped bacon around them, they cook it. Like, no joke. It is very hot. But moving on from that clip, and all the way down the line, because nothing else happened until we get down here to Yenikiheve, or Yenikijeve, whatever you want to call it. How's it pronounced in Ukrainian? Yenikizve, something like that. Anyways, we got to see something very interesting today, something that will make many viewers very happy. We got to see that today, officially, it has been confirmed the Ukrainians have used their first ground-launched small-diameter bomb, because the Russians gathered up some debris, and all of them are components of a ground-launched small-diameter bomb. You see him going through his box here, and showing the fins on the ground-launched small-diameter bomb.
Or GLSDB.
Yeah, the GLSDB. When you see another fin right there.
I don't know why, but when I looked at that the first time, it reminded me of that Gensu missile, like the slice and dice missile.
The slap chop.
Yeah, the slap chop. You know, we just used one of those again yesterday.
Yeah, and what was cool about it is that we took out the guy and we didn't take out any collateral around him. So I was like, wow, that's cool. Like I actually thought it would be a little brutal, but considering that the last time we used it, it completely cut down on collateral casualties. I was like, wow, that's something we ought to start using all the time, because
I think if you hit them dead on, like I don't think there's any inhumane aspect to it as long as you hit them dead on. But I think if you if somebody's a bad shot or something like that, it might end up grazing somebody or something like that, which could end up a little bit ugly.
Here's the slap chop. All right, we got ourselves an Iranian general. Boom, you got a gray. Boom, you got a martyr. Look at this. Look at this. Isn't this great? Yeah, look at this. We got a Russian general right here. Boom, we got Chop Salami. Boom, we got Budanov. Wait, no, not Budanov. Hang on. Who's that guy's name? Gerasimov. Boom. Who's the other guy? Who's the guy of the Black Sea Fleet? I don't even know.
Hell, who knows?
But you see the blades, they're German, and the Germans make high quality stuff. Check this out. Boom, there goes Putin. Look at that. We got ourselves a hero of Russia. Look at that right there. Absolutely impressive. Look at this. Boom, we got Kim Jong-un. Look, you got fat all over the ground. Look at that. It's just everywhere.
Boom, I'm not sack, and you got a Q. Let's go.
Now, excuse me, I'm going to go to a hotel and get in some very, some very odd relations with a working woman, and then, she's going to bite me, and then I'm going to beat her. and then I'm going to go to
slap chop. Let's see a doctor. Go to prison.
Yeah, look at this, y'all. Look at this. You're going to love my nuts. But anyways, moving on.
And then the guy in prison said, "Oh, yeah, you're going to love my nuts." Whoa, it's a laptop. Get back. Whoa, whoa, whoa.
You know what that guy did in prison, man? He sat there and said, look at this. A prison shank. Kind of unimaginative. Kind of unoriginal. You stab someone, it's nasty. It's ugly. Look at this. You want this? Right here. Look at this. A pocket knife. A real, genuine pocket knife. Look at that. It's German made. You know it's high quality. Watch this. Stab. Critical bleeding. Stab. Another one. He's dead. He's dead on the floor right there. Look at that. That's absolutely incredible. Now, let's swipe that away. Let's get over this prison guard over here. Look, you're going to love his nuts. And see, look at that. We got ourselves another 20-year sentence.
Oh, damn, man. Oh, goodness.
Oh, man. Anyways, we got to move on from that and into the very northern side.
I really got into that.
Yeah, I mean, I had to. But anyways, moving on from that, we got to see some Russian tanks destroyed by the Presidential Brigade of Ukraine. And we're going to cut the music, but we can see the drone going right into the driver's hatch right there and exploding. Actually, it didn't go into the driver's hatch, it missed. But we can see the second one coming in and hitting right on the side of the turret. And the engine's now on fire, and then the video clip ends. But that fire was hot enough that it burned out the rest of the tank. It brewed up and burned down. And then we see the outro. It says Presidential Brigade, and that's pretty much all you need to get out of it. But moving on from that, because the news is great and all, but we got to get on to something that is very interesting and very concerning. As of today, officially, the Russians have operationally encircled the city of Avdiivka. That is something that we can confirm as of right now. The Russians have not only moved onto the Highway of Life, they've in fact moved over the Highway of Life, and are now moving to the next village, which is Lestochkine, which is behind the city of Avdiivka. This is something that's very concerning at the moment. I was telling y'all last time we talked about this on the news, that if the Russians continue to advance and overran the Highway of Life, the Ukrainians would most likely conduct a withdrawal of the city. We have not seen that yet. And this is something fairly shocking, because the turn of events here is almost like it's supposed to be a savior in a movie. From what we've started to understand, and I didn't want to say this directly until we got enough information, the 110th Brigade, which many of y'all know we've covered, is the brigade alongside the 47th that has been holding the area in between Stepove and northern Avdiivka, has been exhausted to a critical level, beyond the point of operational efficiency. And because of that, the Russians were able to break through in this area and push right through. And I think this is the reason, I think this may be one of the reasons why General Zelenskyy was dismissed. The 110th Brigade had been in Avdiivka from the very beginning of the battle in October all the way until today. Today they officially withdrew from the city, and this area is now being occupied by another brigade. And I'm about to get to who that is, because the name drop here is going to be unbelievable. But nevertheless, the fact that the 110th Brigade never got rotated out and replaced with a fresh brigade is telling us that there may actually have been a critical issue as to why Zelenskyy was dismissed, because a unit being in a major battle for that long without being rotated out is something that you rarely ever hear about in most battles throughout most modern wars. And I would say that that's probably what led to the compromising of this area of the front, is that the 110th had just been exhausted beyond belief and then just got pushed back. So now, today, the Ukrainians are officially operationally encircled. The entire garrison of Avdiivka is being cut off from supplies at this moment. And unless things change here quickly, this situation is going to continue to spiral into a very bad circle until either the Ukrainians are completely besieged in the city, or until they have to withdraw due to a lack of supplies. Today, the order was given by the president of Ukraine and the brand new chief of the armed forces, Oleksandr Syrsky, to replace the 110th with a brand new brigade. This brigade has also been on the front lines for a good bit, but it's combat experienced and one that has a name that people know. People fear to hear that this brigade has been moved into a certain area of the front lines, because it means that there is business going down, and people are not going to be spared the wrath of this brigade as it continues to advance forward. I'm talking about no other brigade than the one and only, the absolutely unstoppable and the unbeatable 3rd Azov Brigade has been moved from Bakhmut into Avdiivka, and they raced into the area where the Russians had overrun the Highway of Life with an MRAP convoy blazing the guns as they advanced. Here's the clip. We see their MRAP continuing to advance. Behind them is a whole convoy of MRAPs. And when you see they got a little joystick down there to operate the turret, a big upgrade from the hand crank on most Humvee turrets. And that was the end of that clip, but that is the official entry of the 3rd Azov Brigade into the Battle of Bakhmut. This is serious news. The 3rd Brigade is one of the best trained in close-up urban fighting, and not only that, trench warfare, which is also a very up-close affair that requires an extreme amount of training and a very high level of morale. Pretty much the Ukrainian form of a shock trooper from World War I or World War II on really any side that was fighting during that time. These guys are truly incredible, and according to the information that we have gotten from the 47th and 46th Brigades, which are also fighting in the city, the 3rd Brigade has been brought in to stabilize the situation, and not only that, break through the Russian line that's been created over the Highway of Life and reopen these vital supply lines to the Ukrainian defenders inside the city, so that way they do not have to retreat, they can continue to fight on. According to what we got today, this is what was said by the 46th Brigade's representative. The situation was improved, if not saved, by the arrival of units of the 3rd Brigade, which immediately entered the battle and generally stabilized the situation in the area south of the Avdiivka coke plant, and now almost single-handedly hold the northern face of the 4-kilometer-long corridor through which stabilization measures will be carried out. One, after all, someone intelligent was found at the top of the movement began from the private sector in the southeast towards the 9th quarter, around which all the logistics of Avdiivka are now based, but they were literally a day and a half late. Most of the tactical units are now in a pocket east of the city center, and practically the 3rd Brigade's units are responsible for maintaining its neck, meaning that the 3rd Brigade is pretty much responsible for this entire area here, from this lake to the Avdiivka coke plant. This area the 3rd Brigade is now responsible for. The enemy was able to physically cut Avdiivka-Lostochkine Highway, the Highway of Life, reaching the industrial area, and reduced the possibilities for logistics and withdrawal by exactly half, because they only have the other corridor to work off of now, which goes pretty much directly across the front line and into the village of Severne and Tonenke over here to the west, which is what they're talking about by having it cut in half. At the, only the primers of the Severna remain, which will last exactly as long as the 9th quarter will last. At the same time, the tracks themselves are under artillery and drone control of the enemy, which will add additional difficulties. Taking into account the fact that the enemy's aircraft unloaded practically everything onto the 9th quarter yesterday, they also understand the above-described situation very well. At the exact same time, the Bakhmut experience is absolutely not taken into account when, despite the complexity of the situation, withdrawal of units was carried out quite elastically and gradually. For comparison, the width of the neck of the bag in Bakhmut until the end of the defense and in Avdiivka is now the same, 4 kilometers. But in Bakhmut, it was formed as such only until the moment of release, and in Avdiivka, there are already 5 kilometers from the mouth to the LBC, the bottom of the bag, inside the which the troops are. And when they say the bottom or the top of the bag, they are meaning this encirclement. This is the top of the bag, this is the bottom of the bag. And right now there's a 4-kilometer gap in between the Russian forces based out of Vadiane and the Russian forces based out of Vesely and Kamyanka. Either the Ukrainians push the Russians back in Avdiivka, where the Highway of Life is reopened, or the Ukrainians will have to start conducting a withdrawal. Hopefully the 3rd Brigade, the famous and at this point renowned 3rd Brigade, can fix this situation and improve it, so that way the Ukrainian defenders of Avdiivka can continue to fight on for many more months until they ever actually have to conduct a withdrawal, or until the Russians give up on the battle, one or the other. But moving us on into the other clips that we got today, we got to see one of our final clips of the 110th Brigade as they were moving out of the area. They hit a couple of more Russians with their drone forces and then moved out. And so here's the clip. Sadly, I will not be playing the music. It's copyrighted.
Sound like some sick, mean trap anyway. Courtesy of t.me/rubpack.
That's something that R. Kelly would say, rub pack. But anyways, we see the Russians running down the street. Oh, блядь, сука, блядь, пустите ты нахуй, блядь.
And just like R. Kelly said, the Ukrainian said, I'm gonna piss on you.
And they pissed on him. Look at that. And when you see the next drone coming in on this unsuspecting Ruski soldat and getting him right in the butt. much like R. Kelly. But anyways, and again.
Man, the Ukrainians are getting wild with these drone maneuvers. Like, they're just darting around everywhere. It's like, how can they keep up with that? Like, not like, lose track of where they're going.
Man, the Russians do be wilding, and the Ukrainians be wilding even harder and getting them good. But with that, that's the end of that clip. Gotta say, huge shout out to Rubpack and being able to knock out these Russians. Really impressive stuff. But moving on from that, we now get to move down to the southern end of the city, where we got to hear of a Russian unit speaking of their casualties. Out of their 4,000-man brigade, only 30% of them remain, which means that out of all of them, about 1,300 are left, either in operation. Everyone else has been killed or wounded.
Пойду рядом, труп увидишь, кричи. Тебя, конечно, сниму. Вот БТР, где меня накрыла птичка, прям возле него. Хорошо промазала, попала вверх, а то уже тоже был бы 200. Так что живем мы весело. Серег, он по траншеи, я рядом. Идем за продуктами. Трупы увидишь, кричи. Вон наш танк стоит, тоже подбитый, сука. Все раздолбили. От деревьев, видишь, ничего не осталось. Тут прикопаны уже трупы эти. Почти все раздолбили нахрен. Чего эти окопчики, они очень маленькие. Ай? Трупы, что ли? Вот танки наши подбитые, сука. А, хохол, что ли? Нет, наш. Красная повязка. Половина.
Seems still walking through their trenches of trash and garbage.
Пошли. Пошли дальше. Это еще пособирали, он, пацаны, забирают трупы, приходят. А так тут все было усеяно. Посадки вообще ничего нет.
Oh, that bug got taken out fast. Shout out to Enforcer Matt.
Попал, походу, в блиндаж прям.
Тебя его разобрал как?
Да, вон тоже блиндаж.
Это повезло, что у меня блиндаж пока.
Sadly, I'm actually going to have to end this clip here because I did watch the rest of this one. It starts to get kind of spicy because he starts showing you where the other 66%, 70% of the brigade went. So can't really show you all that. But nevertheless, you can get an idea things ain't going well in southern Avdiivka. And while the Russians may be looking like they're kind of turning the battle around a little bit for themselves, at the exact same time, they took a great deal of losses to even get to this point in the battle. But moving on from that and down into the southern front, we got to see down here another challenge or two of the 82nd Brigade moving around on the southern front, of course, filled with the Rasputitsa kinds of mud, but still showing off one of their favorite tanks. They love these tanks. We also got to hear that the 128th Brigade also captured 11 or 12 Russian soldiers in the area of Robotny. Check this clip out. There's the 128th Brigade. And we can see the Ukrainians here about to get themselves some brand new prisoners.
Wow, they're really smoking them out this time.
Man, they smoking,
burning them out. Oh, look at that.
Oh, look at that.
I guess he figured he wouldn't burn up. He would just give up and, go into Ukrainian custody.
Oh, and here comes the next one. Number 2. They're coming out of the Beaver Lodge.
Really?
That's
a great little hut they built there.
I've seen beavers honestly do better. I'm not even kidding. Like, beavers have done better than that. And we see the three of them. Salmon says, hold your hands. Salmon says, come on out. Salmon says, give up, blade. Salmon says, stand in a group.
Say how many guys were hiding in that hole?
11. 11 guys.
Wow. Sure taking a good minute to get out of there.
Man, they're all getting out like they're just learning how to walk. They probably are, because they're probably all just dog-faced drunk, so they're trying to learn how to walk again. And there they all go. Waddle, waddle, waddle. Waddle, waddle, waddle. This guy obviously has crap in his pants right here. This one, look at him. Waddle, 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 waddle. Waddle, waddle, waddle. Dude, he's carrying a full load. He's like, I gotta get this out of my pants. But anyways, moving on from that, 11 Russian prisoners captured. Pretty good haul. Pretty good catch. They didn't even get catches like that on Deadliest Catch anymore. I'm telling you what, when the Ukrainians go out there and they capture prisoners, hell, the U.S. Department of Corrections wishes they were as good as catching prisoners as these guys are. I mean, they really make it look like easy work, and it really is easy work. When you go to a bunch of starving Russians living in a beaver hut, I'm pretty sure they're going to give up and surrender. And y'all heard that right? It wasn't a beaver hut, it was a beaver hut. Because if you were in there with Justin Bieber the entire war, I bet you'd give up too. But moving on from that...
hell yeah. In 2 seconds.
Hell yeah, man. I'd give up and walk away. But anyways, moving on from that and not meaning to diss on Justin Bieber because apparently he actually went through some really bad crap, if you didn't hear, Matthew. Like some really...
I didn't hear that.
Yeah, he went through some really, really bad crap when he was actually a very popular pop star. And, you know, it's kind of like a Weinstein level crap. Like, it was pretty bad. So, you know, don't want to diss on him too bad because, you know, I hate to hear that for him. But nevertheless, we got to see some Ukrainians crossing the Dnipro River, just absolutely throwing y'all through an emotional roller coaster, hearing about the sad story of what Bieber went through, and then going to the Ukrainians crossing a river. Here's the clip. I've never heard that song before. That's actually brand new. Oh, we got the crank. Oh, we got that.
Hey.
We got that Yugo crank. Now, that's actually rare. Pretty cool, too.
Looks like he might be a little seasick, maybe, or getting there.
Oh, man, I would be. I'd be like, get me off this freaking thing. And they got a speedboat here. Nice. That's the end of the clip, but showing you a little river crossing going on right there. In the meanwhile, we got to see the 36th Brigade, because the 36th Marine Brigade is in Krinky, and they are the one holding it at the moment, but they do have tanks. And we got to see one of them roaming around on the right bank of the Dnipro River right here. It's a T-64BV, a fairly good tank for as far as Soviet tanks go, but sadly not on the left bank of the Dnipro River because it's impossible to transport it over there at the moment. But moving on from that little bit of news and on into our last bit in the area, we got to see the Ukrainians once again finding and destroying some Russian BM-21 grads. And so, here's the clip. There's the grads. And funnily enough, there's already a destroyed grad right there where this one's sitting. It looks like the Russians literally never learn. Now we see the Ukrainian drone coming up on the top going... It's about to eat... Oh my god!
Oh! A small nuke. Oh, look, a little Valentine's Day thing, too.
Oh.
That's sweet.
How cute. That's how cute. But nevertheless... That scene in that clip, nice to see they were able to blow up some Russian grads. I bet you the Ukrainians were very grad. It was Valentine's Day. Anyways, moving on from that and out of the area, it's time for us to get to Kyiv because we actually had a really long news segment tonight. It was 2 hours long. And it's time for us to let y'all hear that speech. So without further ado, here is the speech from President Volodymyr Zelenskyy here on Valentine's Day of all days. So... let me get to it. Let me get those subtitles up here.
Peach.
And without further ado,
Ukraine.
there is the peach.
Підсумки цього дня. Перше, дякую Збройним силам України, дякую воїнам ГУР, групі 13, 9-го департаменту. Сьогодні додалось ще безпеки у Чорному морі. І ще мотивації нашим людям. І це важливо. І ми крок за кроком очистимо Чорне море від російських терористичних об'єктів. Друге, провів сьогодні особливо тривалу нараду щодо одного з ключових питань цієї війни, а саме наших українських можливостей протидіяти російським дронам. Були на нараді Сирський, Умєров, Сухаревський, Шмигаль, Камишин, Федоров, Єрмак, Коростельов, представники виробників, представники розвідок, заслухав звіт щодо наявних розробок. Працюємо і над комплексами РЕП, радіоелектронної боротьби, і над комплексами ЗРК. Вже близько половини наявних систем саме українського виробництва. Розробки наших людей і, звичайно, є і спільні проекти з партнерами. І, власне, розпочатих виробництв та заявлених на виробництво розробок доволі багато. Головне тепер усі їх вмонтувати в практику застосування на фронті. Правильне налаштування та переналаштування на основі реальних бойових потреб. Правильна розстановка, правильна і системна інтеграція до тактики бойових дій, правильна взаємодія між запитами фронту та можливостями нашої промисловості, максимальне нарощування наших виробництв. А це у підсумку захист життя наших воїнів та розширення наших можливостей діяти на фронті. Від протидії російським орланам до знищення російської РЕБ. Цей рік має забезпечити для України більше результатів, саме таких у відновленні безпеки для українських дій. Я дякую всім нашим розробникам і виробникам, і дякую всім, хто розвиває сучасний технологічний компонент в силах оборони. Усі фінансові, організаційні та регуляторні кроки, які від держави потрібні, держава зробить. І маємо усвідомлювати, що усе, що зараз наша держава, наші люди навчаться робити заради наших українських цілей у війні, обов'язково стане частиною українського експорту після війни, після досягнення наших завдань. Цілком справедливих. Глобальне значення України – бути донором безпеки, експортером безпеки. Українці вміють бути сильними і завжди тепер будуть сильними. І допомагатимуть іншим. Третє – чергове розширення наших міжнародних коаліцій, зокрема коаліції дронів. До Великої Британії, Латвії та Швеції приєднались Нідерланди, Німеччина, Естонія. Фундамент коаліції сильний, коаліція вже працює і сьогодні, до речі, нове засідання Рамштайну. Нарощування спільних виробництв і прискорення постачання головні дрони та ППО – пріоритети цього Рамштайну. І ще одне. Минулого вечора і ночі російські терористи дуже жорстко обстріляли місто Селидове Донецької області. Влучання по житлових будинках, по звичайній цивільній забудові, по лікарні. Прицільний російський удар по місту. На момент цього удару в лікарні було майже 150 пацієнтів, 3 людини загинули. Мама з маленьким сином і жінка, яка готувалася стати мамою. Мої співчуття рідним та близьким. Обов'язково російська держава отримує відповідь на цей удар. Ми обов'язково маємо перемогти, обов'язково досягти українських цілей. Безпека здобувається лише силою і сильними. Слава усім, хто б'ється заради нашої держави та людей. Слава усім, хто працює заради України. Слава Україні!
And with
And
that,
Hiram Slava.
Rom Slava. And that is the end of the speech from President Volodymyr Zelenskyy here on the 721st day of the war. And believe it or not, we are only 9 days away from the very second anniversary of this war. Unbelievable to think that it's been going on this long. Unbelievable to think that we've been listening to speeches from President Zelenskyy since about day 60 of the war. And crazy to think that the Ukrainians are still going very strongly 2 years on, and what was supposed to be a 3-day to 1-week-long war with a total victory for the Russian Federation. 2 years later, that total victory has still never arrived, and the Ukrainians are continuing to fight on with the same emboldened and really courageous determination that they had at the very start. Truly incredible to think about, and something that I have to say is a wonderful way to round out that speech tonight. Once again, reminding everyone that it's been nearly 2 years now since this war began, and we started covering it. But we have a lot to talk to y'all about. We have loads of people who've been throwing in questions tonight, both in the super chats, helping this channel to keep on running, and also in the live chats as well. Also very interesting to answer. And once again, from the amazing people of the LSA who also are always helping the channel to keep on running by being here and enjoying the channel. Of course, I can't wait to see what all of y'all have to say. But Matthew, I think I forgot to talk about one of the questions that you asked everyone tonight.
So yes, we have one question left to cover, which is a poll. It says, will Russia's space-based nuke be the beginning of a space Cold War between Russia and the United States? It looks like the vast majority of people said yes, it will be the beginning of such a Cold War, while 21% said it's too early to tell, and even smaller percentage than that, 13% said it will be ignored/addressed quietly. And in my opinion, it will certainly be the start of I guess you'd call it a space Cold War. It'll definitely be the start of an arms race, in my opinion, because now If it's truly the way it sounds like it is, with the United States not having a countermeasure to counteract this new weapon that's either going to be launched into space or is already there, we're going to have to urgently find a way to counter that, because that is such a grave threat to our national security. It cannot be understated how serious that actually is. That gives Russia basically first strike capability when it comes to knocking out our comms, which is crucial to making sure that we can respond to an attack. So, in my opinion, this is bordering on the level of more or less than a Cold War, maybe a hot war, getting pretty close to it. Because if there's anything that would trigger it, this would be something like that. Kind of like the Bay of Pigs invasion might have been, the start of that. So, Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say that I think that this is a serious situation. It's certainly going to be posing possibly a second Cold War in space, I would believe, although the Russians are not the kind of economic power that the Soviet Union was to really justify a Cold War. It pretty much will turn into a small Cold War with the Russians if they do launch this thing, or if it has already been launched. Hopefully we can find a way around that, and we can find a way to resolve this without anything serious coming out of it. But nevertheless, I think if the Russians are hell-bent on sending that thing up into space, we're probably going to start sending our own nuclear bombs up into space as well as a deterrent, because that's really all we can do, is to try and make sure that our response will be the same as theirs. But in reality, it doesn't really matter if we send up a nuclear bomb or not. This is kind of an empty threat, because you see, if the Russians blow up the nuclear bomb, they're not only going to be knocking out our satellites, they're knocking out theirs at the exact same time. So I don't really know if they'd ever use it or not, because much like we'll be put into the dark without our satellites, for the most part, the Russians are also going to be put in the exact same level of darkness as well. So it pretty much is just a doomsday kind of a weapon. No one wins if they use it, including themselves, because they'll be put in the exact same situation that we'll be in for the most part.
I wonder if they have a way to sort of like direct it to a certain area of orbit, so that way their satellites aren't affected by it.
Nah, I mean, like when Starfish happened, it affected every satellite in orbit around the Earth. Even if they were on the other side of the Earth when the explosion happened, those satellites ended up being affected, I think, a week or two later, and ended up being knocked out completely as well. So if you blow up a nuke up there, it doesn't matter if they're on the other side, their satellites are on the other side of the Earth or not. They're going to get blown away pretty much in a week or two as well, much like ours will. So doesn't really matter. Yeah, so they will screw themselves over if they used it. But nevertheless, maybe we need to try and return back to a concept brought up in the 80s, which was called Star Wars, which was where we were going to set up laser stations in space and try and destroy any nuclear weapons in space with directed laser energy. I mean, the technology is certainly advanced rapidly enough nowadays that may actually be possible. It may not be unbelievably economically infeasible, so maybe something like that could be done. But who knows? That's really something that I would be out of my league talking about, to be honest with you. I could just come up with some kind of theories or ideas, but I wouldn't really have any kind of a great answer as far as any of that goes. But with that, I hope that does address that well, and I think we're on into the questions, Matthew.
And we're moving on into our questions, but also one other point I want to say real quick is the information came out about this potential weapon being launched by Russia into orbit. It came out by way of sort of like an unofficial leak by a politician in the government. One thing that I found kind of odd is, why is that type of information going to be hidden from the American public? In my opinion, it's that kind of stuff that should not be classified. And anything that involves our safety or the safety of the public as a whole, we have to know how that's being addressed by the government, or otherwise we can't make informed decisions about who's making the right decisions and who we should keep in what positions. So in my opinion, I think that information should be made public more often, because it sounds like even right now, there is still a level of classification around it, which the people who know the information can't really breach right now without breaking the law. I don't understand the point of classifying that information, because some stuff we have to keep secret for national security reasons. We can't let our adversaries know about some advantages we have in war. But this has nothing to do with breaching anything like that. It's totally separate. But I'd be curious to know what everyone else thought about that as well.
Yeah, I would have to say, I don't really like the idea of it being secret. I see some people saying, it's to protect sources. Well, you don't have to say the source you got it from. You can just say the information you know, like what we learned today. I think that would be something important for the public to know, because think about it, from from a general political perspective, not picking a side, wouldn't this be important for the U.S. public to know is an issue, so that way when this election cycle is coming around, maybe the questions could be asked of the candidates, what will you do in response to this upcoming threat that may or may not be happening or has already happened, and then get the answers from the candidates to see who sounds like the most logical and reasonable-minded person with maybe the best approach. I would think that that would probably be a good thing to do, because it's a little silly to me that such a serious and pressing issue could just kind of be underlined, well, not really underlined, but kind of sidelined for things that honestly to me really mean a hill of beans of difference as far as policies go nowadays. Like, to quickly get into it, just for a brief moment, why in the world is this going to be sidelined for an argument on, say, healthcare? Just to bring that up really quickly, because that's a little bit of a contentious topic. I think everyone can agree. There's very strong opinions on both sides there. How in the world are we going to have an argument on healthcare when this thing could be detonated above the United States and possibly destroy most internet or computer systems here on the ground for the medical system to not even operate? But I feel like we kind of need to have the priorities here from top to bottom and address crises like this first and then get back to everything else later. Because this is something that does not need to be sidelined. This will affect everything else that happens in the United States if this weapon is put up there. It could end up, having massive consequences on literally any kind of decision you could imagine. Think of any, and do not say it in the live chat and bring up your, partisan opinion here, because, we don't have politics here on this channel. But think of any domestic political issue that you can imagine here in the United States, and then think about how that could be affected if the internet, or better yet, all satellite communications are knocked out completely. Think about that, and then think, well, maybe we ought to address this first, and maybe that ought to be the forefront of any kind of discussion politically here in the United States before we move back into the other subjects. Because if this isn't addressed and the other stuff is addressed, we're kind of going at things backwards. I think that would be a good way for everyone to look at this at the moment. And
also, I see the opposite argument here as well. I saw Butchie 777 say there's too many, or they said maybe there's too many uneducated public that would panic after the news got a hold of that information and then released it. And that's a valid argument. There are a lot of people that aren't really up to speed on world events, and they're really taking advantage of basically panic. Some people would take the opportunity to go berserk. But at the same time, in my opinion, I think the cons of that side of the equation are outweighed by the need to know to the general public, because that same quote unquote, I don't generally think the public is generally uneducated. I mean, there's some people that are in the know more than others, but everyone can vote. So the voters need to know exactly what action is being taken, because that same quote unquote uneducated public is going to have to go to the polling booth and decide who they want to make those decisions in the future. And if we're not even fully informed as to what decisions are being made on what topic, then the voters are just in the dark, and we're basically shooting blind at this point. So in my opinion, that goes anti-democratic almost, not to let the people know exactly what's going on. They don't have to tell us everything, because everything doesn't need to be told. But when it comes to all of us potentially, getting blown up, I think we have a right to know that.
I would agree. And I see I see the argument behind that. And actually, I'll have to be a little bit different than Matthew, because over my time of doing this channel, running this channel and covering the war, I found out that 9 times out of 10, people have absolutely stupid takes on the war, even if they are pro-Ukrainian. They, have no realistic concept of limitations. It's like just magic movie world out there where the good guys can do anything, and that's absolutely ridiculous and a completely unrealistic way to look at things. And the bad guys are always going to be bad at everything and will never be able to do anything. That's also a really stupid way to look at things. And I've seen that a lot. And especially in this community, because this is the only one I've had to have laser-like focus on. And when I started to look into this community and the kind of stupid stuff that would be said, sometimes I started to realize, wow, a lot of people really just are stupid, and they never do any research, and they never really look into anything. They just come up with whatever sounds good on their head, and then they just run with it. For example, then an offensive in Kherson, the Ukrainians can literally just hop across the river like it's a small creek and then just go racing to Crimea. I've known from the start and been telling y'all that's going to be a pretty tough thing to do. There's a whole bunch of logistical limitations. And then everybody else in the Ukraine war community, it seemed, just went, oh, you know, they could just hop across. They could just run straight to Crimea, you know? And I was like, no, they can. Like, you know, that's going to be much more difficult than they're making out to be. It requires a whole bunch of other stuff in advance. And nobody thought about that. And, like, when you see that, it's like, what, do people not think? Like, do people not research anything or, like, think with their minds, you know? Or, you know, for example, on a diplomacy aspect, people don't think with their minds there either. Like, you know, the pro-Russians go, well, maybe if we just let them take Ukraine, maybe that'll make them happy, you know, and that's literally just an appeasement mindset that didn't work in World War II, and we're going to try and do it again and think it will work this time. Or better yet, the folks who go, you know, hell, I mean, you know, we might as well just, you know, like, send them F-35s or F-22s, why not? You know, it's like, well, what? You don't think of national security interests? You know, it's kind of weird to me. Like, I've seen that, and I'm not saying, you know, it's viewers. I'm actually saying more so it's other people who cover this as a YouTube kind of a deal that I've seen saying things where I'm like, what the hell, are y'all, like, not thinking with your head? And that's something that
I just don't think some people just don't care. I think some people know what they're saying is a little bit wild and crazy, but they just really don't care, and they just feel like saying what they want. Because I think generally speaking, most people, unless they're a lunatic or a nut or something, is gonna know if it comes down to like nuking somebody or defending your country with nukes, that's a last resort, and that shouldn't be something you just immediately like resort to as a first attack. And you know, some people will be like, what? We ought to just nuke Russia if they do something. Well, it's like, well, you know, you can't just like start nuking somebody just because you have a problem with them. You have to sort of like take it step by step and escalate as you go. But you know, some people just say whatever they want. That's why, like, for example, Twitter is a perfect outlet for people like that to go on there and just say that kind of crap. Like, they just go on there and they'll say whatever they want. Like, oh, we ought to nuke Russia. Oh. Or, like, we ought to leave NATO or something like that. It's like, oh, God. It's like, not everybody should just go out and just say crap. Like, you know, I hate to say this, but not everybody should be able to say their opinions, the crazy ones like that, on a huge platform. Because there are some that even we're aware of on YouTube that are just nuts. They get on their platform to spew crap. And it's like, you know, there is a valid opinion and then there's a crazy one. And there's a lot of crazy opinions running around these days.
Yeah, and also 420 said, I never said cross the river. Oh, no, I'm not talking about y'all as viewers. I'm talking about other YouTubers that I've seen saying things. You know, and then they'll say you know, they'll be like, I'm a very accomplished person. I was an accountant. And I, as an accountant, completely understand the complexities of global politics and diplomacy, as well as large open front conflicts. I understand it all. It's like, no, you don't. It's like, you understand how to, like, balance bank accounts. You don't know anything about this. Like, you know, like, and I used to not be of that mindset at the beginning of the war. I was like, anyone could say anything they want. I'm sure, you know, they have a pretty good take. But as the war's going on, I've seen there's not really a lot of good takes out there. A lot of really just, like, ignorant people just say ignorant things and then act like it's as serious and as valid as a reasonable response. Like, you know, like me saying tonight, I don't know how we can respond to the Russians doing this if they did it. You know, like, I have no idea. We would really have to think about that and try and come up with something. Some people are going to go, I know, we just smacked down a tactical nuke on Baikonur. It's like, you can't do that. Like, it's like, you literally just can't. Like, that would, you know, like, the implications of that? Like, that is insane. Like, you can't do something like that.
And also, speaking of the nukes thing, it just reminded me, I don't know how many of y'all thought about this today, but I was following the entire story coming out about the quote-unquote national security issue, and at first, nobody knew what anyone was talking about when it came to the situation we found out, which was a nuclear satellite launch. I originally thought that the story was going to be about Iran having nuclear weapons, and it finally came out in an intel report that they did, you know, and with confirmation, have them. I was kind of shocked to see today that it turned out being about Russia, of all things, with their nuclear satellite. Because I could have sworn it was either about China developing some kind of new hypersonic or it was going to be Iran having nukes. But I was kind of surprised by that. Enforcer, I don't know if you were following it throughout the day like that, but were you surprised yourself?
I was, when they said it was the Russians, I was like, well, what the hell could they have done? I was like, you know, hypersonics have been proven to be ineffective, so it can't be a hypersonic. So what can it be? I honestly was thinking, like, I didn't even try and speculate. I was like, I think I'm going to have to get some more info on this before I even think about what it is, because honestly, I couldn't think of anything that the Russians could do to actually pose a national security threat immediately. And then when they said it was a nuclear bomb in space, I was like, oh, That is like the only thing I didn't think of, and that was the most severe thing that you could actually imagine the Russians to do within reasonableness. And
I wouldn't have guessed in a million years that that's what they were about to announce. Like I was banking on Iran having nukes, but that was a total shock to me.
yeah, I wasn't expecting that either. That's why I was like, hell, I don't even know what it could be. I was like, I guess we might as well just sit back and wait for them to say what it is. And then when they said it, I was like, no, that's obviously a national security threat. But who the hell would have ever guessed? Like I would have never guessed that would have been the case. Is that this is what's causing massive panic in the government at the moment? And like, and also what's crazy is that I could take y'all through a walk through the comments section on the video we made today about this, and there is at the moment. Let me go grab it real quick. By the way, Matthew, we're at 160,070 subscribers, so we are like 66 away from a little bit more than that, but we're getting really close to getting to.
I can hear him right now.
Oh yeah, it. It's coming. Like it's coming around the corner. It's going to be happening.
Oh man!
But let me go grab this real quick because right now the video we made today has about 60,000 views on it. Which is really nice. And also, it has 709 comments on it. And just to give you a little bit of a perspective, the other video we made the other day before that only had 216 comments on it. So, a lot less comments. But if you go through them, the kind of stuff that is said in here is absolutely ludicrous. Like, I'll read to some of them. I turn to telling. I call BS. Let's see. And someone says, oh, hang on, let me make sure. I thought this was a real post until I noticed who posted it. Like, this isn't coming straight out of the U.S. government's mouth. Like, we didn't literally have the source. And then also,